All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ, where the Tennessee Volunteers men's basketball team joined the top 5 this week in the AP poll. They play Vanderbilt tonight. You'll already see how that went when you listen to this on your morning commute here on a Wednesday. Tennessee baseball, preseason number 2, Tennessee football finishing number 6, all things, all the time, Tennessee here on this very program. But that might be it for the Tennessee PR push on this edition of the podcast, because Matt Green, in his last day before Georgia fans all go into hibernation for 8 months, he gets to celebrate. He gets to enjoy back-to-back national championships. Whomst among us could have ever foreseen? Not Nolan Smith. 7-5. That felt more likely for the Georgia Bulldogs. People forget coming into this 2022 football season. Kirby Smart, 0-0 every single week. Who would have thought? Week in, week out. Not the amazing underdog story. Not the Underfrogs. The Underdogs with an AWG. Matt Green, your football team, back-to-back national titles. How are you feeling?
It's a great time to be a Georgia Bulldog fan, sir. Back-to-back national titles. I just really I can't explain this feeling. I think Georgia fans, more than just about any other fan base, they were a very tortured bunch of being so close for so long and not being able to get it done. I feel like we earned this. As one famous song put it, I paid my dues time after time. What is it? What's the next slide? I served my sentence. I served my sentence, but committed no crime. That's what it felt like to be a Georgia fans. But ultimately, we are the champions now, and it's beautiful, man. Kirby Smart, like you said, this is what you're focusing on for some reason. Is the Georgia fans or the Georgia players saying we were doubted and all that, and it's not a rags to riches story. Everyone knows Georgia was favored versus TCU. This isn't a Cinderella story. But the fact remains, Georgia was doubted. For a team that was the defending national champions, like lots of times it's just kind of the de facto, oh yeah, they're number one again next year. Like we forget so quickly because Georgia just came out week 1 and absolutely dominated, and it was like, oh shit, they're going to be just as good as they were last year. But the whole offseason, there was a lot more talk of 15 guys going to the draft. Like, they're going to take a step back defensively. Like, I mean, that LSU team that they broke their record went from 14-0 or 15-0 to a 7-5 season or so the next year in 2020. Or I'm not even sure what they finished. But it was a mediocre season LSU had after winning a championship. It's like there was a lot, and also the talk of, this is Saban's revenge tour, Nick Saban's most talented team of all time. Like, Georgia was definitely not the favorite. They're preseason number 3, third best odds to win it, but it's like, it's just college football. Like, it's not a 3 out of 120, it's 3 out of 5 or 6. Like, there really aren't that many true contenders year in and year out. Like, some people kind of argue that there's even 5 or 6 teams some years, so Georgia, in terms of being a reigning national champion, like you look at the preseason SEC predictions, like even like the first team all SEC, I think Alabama had like 8-10 guys on first team all SEC. Like, there was a lot more hype about Alabama coming into the year, and just this kind of, that's the thing, is what the Georgia standard is. It's not everyone doubted they'd be really good this year. It's they doubted they win a national championship, and that's Georgia's only goal, is to win a national championship. And there's people that were doubting them, man. And it's sports talk. Like, everyone's always gonna say that it's us against the world or everything. Like, Ohio State was saying us against the world and all that. It's like, you're Ohio State. Like, you're one of the powerhouses in this sport. Like, you got in without winning your conference. It's not really you against the world. But in terms of like the fact, like it's much more than Bryce Young's Heisman speech, right? Like, oh, rags to riches. I was the quarterback at one of the best high school programs in the country, 5-star. Go to Alabama and win the Heisman. Yeah, that's pretty much on par for the course for what you were supposed to be. But this Georgia team, like, we're quick to forget because of how good they were so early on. But there was, I don't think anyone believed they would be this good this year. I mean, there's people saying Stetson Bennett should have gone pro or just gave it up because there's no way his 2022 could be better than 2021. Because for some reason he's the only guy that experience is not going to make better. Like you saw how much Stetson improved from 2020 to 2021, and then he got even better in 2022.
Well, I think part of it was just the odds of him repeating because we've only seen it. Saban only did it once, and that was in the pre-CFP era. And it was like, hey, you went out on a great note. Like you were running the risk of like ending on a sour note when you're now, I think, unquestionably the best quarterback.
Matt Leinart returns for his senior year. It's like we're running it back. We're winning the national championship again. It's like, why would it be different for Stetson Bennett?
Well, I think the difference is Matt Leinart could have gone in the first round, and he chose to come back. And it was like, oh, this is kind of interesting that he's coming back to run it back. And the pedigree is just different. With Stetson, you were a folk hero, and you may not leave a folk hero if you come back, and it goes awry, and you get benched or things go backwards or whatever. But they were definitely their over under was what 11.5 before the year we talked about. I think on the pod in our preseason picks of like basically, are they going to go undefeated or are they going to go 11-1 worst case scenario? And they come in at number 3 in the AP poll, which you cited. The teams in front of them, Bama. It's funny, like Richard Johnson of Split Zone Duo made this point today that I thought was a poignant one, which was that this game with the champions, like it's a game of inches. Basically, it's a game of like just one little moment can just completely shift who wins the title or how things go for some of the select few. Like if you don't get the all-time worst big moment kick from Ohio State there, like not even close, Ohio State's the national champion right now. We have a completely different conversation about Ohio State.
It's also a 50-yard field goal.
Well, it wasn't even close, Matt. Like it went far left.
True.
Like that's what I'm saying. It wasn't even blocked or anything. It just was one of the worst big moment kicks we'll ever see in the sport. What we're also looking at is Bama. Like if Bama doesn't, if that pass interference call that saves the drive that Tennessee ends up scoring on in Knoxville, where Tennessee, they have I don't know if it was McKinstry or who it was who returned it in the end zone 60 yards back, but pass interference kind of bails out Tennessee.
Inside the 5 or something.
They lose that game if they don't throw a late pass interference call there. And then obviously the Chase McGrath knuckleball field goal where if you kick that 100 times, he makes that 4 of 100. And Tennessee probably doesn't win in overtime. And then Bama gets in, and we get Bama and Georgia in the SEC title game. And who knows how that goes. It's just funny that these things just come down to 1 or 2 moments that just completely flip. So when people killed Georgia for the Marvin Harrison injury or Jameson Williams last year, I'm like, that's just how this sport goes. It's just for the big dogs, for lack of a better word, you need a little bit of luck and you need a little bit of those 1 or 2 things to go your way. And there were 1 or 2 things that needed to go Bama's way to win the national title. There were 1 or 2 things that needed to go Ohio State's way to win the national title. And there were 1 or 2 things that needed to go Georgia's way to repeat as national champions. I think all 3 could make the case that they could easily they could be considered the best team in college football this year. Like you said, but Georgia did it. And I don't like citing that kind of stuff when it comes to teams actually winning because they did what they had to do in front of them. They can only control what they can control, and that's how sports goes. And that's how this sport specifically goes, where it's just amazing that 1 or 2 moments or 1 or 2 kicks or 1 or 2 plays can ultimately determine whether or not you win a national title or not. But that's ultimately what happened before Georgia thrashed TCU
without a doubt. And it's like you're gonna get zero sympathy from the UGA fan base about anything like that. Like you just go back to 2002, like when Terrence Edwards dropped a wide open pass against Florida and Georgia was a 1-loss team that close to going undefeated, or like 2007 with Stafford and Noshawn. It's like by the time the season was ending, like that may have been the best team in college football. Even the Aaron Murray in 2012, the Devontae Smith, 2nd and 26 in 2017. It's like, or just the fact that a team benched their starting quarterback in the national championship game and you lost that game somehow. Like there's just, of all like the crazy things that just have to go right, like Georgia's always been on the opposite side of that. They've been on the they've been on the losing end more times than not of just like something has to bounce a certain way and it bounces the opposite way. So yeah, you got to recruit better. You got to have if your entire success of your team is built on 2 wide receivers, then you need to get 3 or 4 wide receivers. Like that's just the bottom line. It's always been, and you look at last year too, like Adam Anderson obviously wasn't an injury. He was just a bad person, allegedly. He was Georgia's best pass rusher. And your second half of your season, you played without your best pass rusher. 90% of the season, you played without a guy who looks like an elite NFL wide receiver as a rookie in George Pickens. And then this year to lose Nolan Smith, your best pass rusher, again, play like 90% of your season without your best wide receiver and A.D. Mitchell. Luckily, both of them did come back for the end of the season, so that's kind of almost more important. But Georgia was overcoming adversity just like anybody else. So it's like, yeah, losing those playmaker wide receivers definitely hurt those teams. It's like you got to overcome it, and you're not going to get any sympathy for a second from any Georgia fan.
Will you apologize to me for getting on my case about saying the national championship happened a week ago and that this game was not worth any of our times if we're not a Georgia fan coming into this one? What did I say in this podcast? I said this was going to be a blowout. I picked, 52-14 or 24 or something?
I think it was 42-14, I think was your score. Yeah.
And you were like, whoa, couldn't do it. I didn't see a 60 burger coming out of this one.
No.
Like 65-7 that we need to talk about because people cited the Notre Dame-Bama game and some other past national championship lopsided games, but this was a different level of lopsided where 65-7, like the one thing that's going to help the Big 12, because I was thinking about this after, like how the committee would view the Big 12 after a game like this in the national championship. And I think if we were staying at 4, the Big 12 is in some trouble when it comes to needing a break from the committee to put them in for if they have a 1-loss champ or something, and then you have a 2-loss SEC team, they're out now.
I disagree. I mean, TCU won a game. Like they actually won. They beat the Big Ten champion. So if anything, the Big Ten is the conference that should be indicted here. Like they lost both of these games. And they had 2 teams that were like questionable, like had questionable schedules all season. Like obviously, those are both great games. Michigan, Ohio State both barely lost both of those games. But I mean, you shouldn't like react for the entire conference just because Georgia is way better than TCU. It's like TCU. That's one thing like I don't understand how TCU's getting like though they should have never been there in the first place type narrative after this game. It's like they won a game in the college football. Like there's like 6 or 7 programs in the country that have actually won a college football playoff game. Like that's a very exclusive list. And TCU is actually beat Michigan has never won a playoff game. Like they're 0-2. Ohio State, they've won back in 2014. Oh, and then I guess Fields got one. But Ohio State has more losses than wins in the college football playoff as well. So, TCU ran up against I definitely I will agree with you that we saw the true national championship game in the Peach Bowl. Like I'll agree that Ohio State is the second best team in the country, and I don't want to spoil our final top 10 that we're going to give. But like Ohio State, like I will concede that point. But like at the end of the day, TCU earned the opportunity to be on the national championship stage with Georgia. Georgia just was a whole lot better. And that was the other thing about Georgia versus Ohio State. It was Ohio State gave Georgia a lot of problems. They were a bad matchup, but Georgia played one of their weaker games. Like they still did play well. Like had over like 500 yards, scored 42 points, but it was they didn't look like crisp, and especially defensively. And a lot of that credit goes to Ohio State. But in this TCU game, like Georgia, like this is the team we saw play most of the year. Like this is the team that came out against Tennessee. This is the team that came out against Oregon. Like Tennessee, I mean, they did call the Dawgs off, and I think Tennessee is a much better team, and obviously that was a 2-touchdown win at the end of the day. It's not nearly the beatdown that this TCU game was, but...
Also, I sent you the 3 photos. You doubted me on the 3 open bombs that they missed, that they had not missed all season, Matt Green.
But they didn't hit them,
Well, what I'm saying is, again, it's a game of inches in the sport where it's just 3 plays that, I mean, if you're playing, you make those throws in the Peach Bowl, in the Dome, in a roof with the different term. I'm saying he probably hits at least 2 of those.
Also, who knew SoFi was an indoor stadium that wasn't closed? So it could rain in there. That was kind of
I didn't really know that either, and it seemed like it only was hitting the TCU fans, which was just adding insult to injury. I mean, pour one out for those guys. Like, I'm trying to like imagine me being a TCU fan. Like, I don't think I would have gone. I don't think I would have, even if I'm like, I don't think I'll ever see a TCU national title game in my lifetime again. There was just no part of me that I'm like, I'm dropping $3,000 when we're down 12.5. Like, it's just, I just don't see it. Like, and it sucks. But this sport's not forgiving in that way, where I'm like, this was the ultimate stars matter game, where I think I sent you Jordan Reed of ESPN, who tweeted out the Jalen Carter snaps, like 3 snaps that just stood out. And you're watching the game. It's just, he's getting double teamed. Tennessee tried to do the same thing, and he's just breaking through. And you're like, what are you doing? What is the point of any of this? Like, the trenches, and that's what people miss when they talk about Georgia, because one of the things my brother and certain family members throw out was Stetson and Ladd McConkey, where it's like, oh, these aren't the heralded guys. Like, Georgia's doing this with they do like the walk-on. It's like, well, Stetson was a 3-star when he came back from JUCO, and he was obviously a different player. But it's also, it helps when you have an incubator around him with 5-star running backs, 4-star running backs, 5-star receivers, 4-star receivers, 5-star tight ends everywhere. And in the trenches, which is the most important part of the sport, have the Jalen Carters, the Jordan Davises of the world that just absolutely wreck things for the 3-stars of the world at TCU, where it's like they have no answer. They didn't have guys. They just don't.
But I think both points are true, though. Georgia has a bunch of 5-stars that are really good players, but that should honestly scare people more than anything, is that the 3-stars that Georgia gets are almost always their best players. Like, you look at an Eric Stokes, you look at a Jordan Davis, like an A.D. Mitchell. Like, obviously they've had, Trayvon Walkers and Nakobe Deans the Keely Ringos that have all been 5-stars and been stud players, but like, they seem to hit on their 3-stars even more so than the 5-stars. And that's what's kind of just, it's scary if you're an opponent of Georgia. Like, because you look at, because that's what the kind of point I've made about Stetson. Like, Stetson is great, but I mean, I struggle to even talk about Stetson, because it's like, I don't know what Stetson's limitations are. You know what I mean? Like, he's better than Anthony Richardson and Will Levis, as far as I'm concerned. And when the NFL people are like, oh, this is why, like, if I had a child ask me, well, why can't Stetson Bennett play quarterback in the NFL? I wouldn't know how to answer it. Well, he's not really tall. Like, he's not really what the NFL guys want. He's not like big. It's like, well, this guy, Russell Wilson's not tall. Bryce Young's not tall. Kyler Murray's not tall. I was like, well, that's true. I can't tell you exactly why he can't play in the NFL. It's like, because we all decided this guy wasn't good like 4 years ago, so we're just gonna hold on to that. Like,
he's also older. Like, there's not a good track record for these older quarterbacks. That's
fair. But he's. And you look at the quarterbacks in the NFL, like Trace McSorley was getting in an NFL game like a week ago. Like, Taylor Heineke's been starting for like a couple of years. Like,
Skylar Thompson got to start this past week.
Like, Stetson Bennett is definitely a guy that's worthy of being on an NFL roster. And you look at some guys that get reps in games, like Davis Mills, like, he's not a good player. Like, there's a lot of, and Richard LeCounte actually said supposedly Richard LeCounte is the reason why Stetson got an offer. He told Kirby Smart that Davis Mills might be the best player, the best quarterback in the country, but Stetson Bennett is the best quarterback in 3A or whatever classification they were in, because they were coming out the same year. But I don't know, like if you look at Georgia's team, I think that the 5-star narrative gets kind of overblown. Like, who's the 5-star receiver on the current roster? Like, I don't think there's a 5-star receiver that they've landed. Like, a lot of 4-star players. Like,
wait, who?
Like
for Georgia?
For Georgia, like Arian Smith,
Jack Saint's a 5-star.
I don't think either of them were 5-stars. Rosemy Jack Saint or Arian Smith, but I mean, they're like top 50 players. Like, they're both big time. Like, A.D. Mitchell was like a 3-star. Like, McConkey's
what was Pickens? 5. Pickens was 5.
Pickens was definitely a 5-star, but he also like hardly played. Stetson hardly got Pickens as a starter. And you look at the tight end room is super elite, but like Kendall Milton was an elite 5-star running back, or like borderline 4-star, 5-star, but he was. I mean, he hasn't really played like a 5-star at the college level. Kenny McIntosh is like a top, I think like 200 player coming out, like a solid 4-star coming. But like, you're not seeing, like, these aren't like Najee Harris coming out of high school, like the Derrick Henrys coming out of high school. Like Georgia doesn't with Stetson Bennett as the quarterback, like I think people just kind of expect a narrative. Like this isn't Jake Fromm out here like leaning on the run game, having two 1,000-yard rushers. And 2 of Jake Fromm's 3 seasons as a starter, he had 2 1,000-yard rushers on his team. Like Stetson never had a 1,000-yard rusher on his team. Like he had a couple guys, and I think Kenny McIntosh is that elite talent. I think he easily could if Georgia spread it around differently. But he's like 800 something yards. Like James Cook and Zamir White last year, like they're good players. Those guys aren't like superstars or anything. So I think that gets kind of overblown too. Georgia's just very good at like every single position, and that the quarterback position included. I think honestly, like the people that were outraged about this guy finishing 4th in the Heisman, if you gave him a couple, like 4 or 5 more garbage time touchdowns in the regular season, this guy probably would have won the Heisman. And then what he did in the playoff, he would have earned it. Like he would have shown that he deserved it, honestly. Like if you look back at, like you were kind of saying when Hendon Hooker should be a finalist, because like if you're telling the story of like the 2022 season, like what he did was so great for Tennessee and everything. Like you're telling the story of the 2022 season. Stetson Bennett is kind of it, like Caleb Williams. Yeah, he's good. Like put up great stats. I think he's a better player, better prospect than Stetson Bennett. But like this guy's 27 touchdowns, throwing 10 on the ground. Like he's a dynamic dual threat. Like, man, it's incredible what Stetson Bennett's lasting legacy. And I'll be honest. I was on the record after the 2020 season was over. JT Daniels solidified himself as a starter. I know I had a conversation with my brother where he said, I never want to see Stetson Bennett take another meaningful snap again for Georgia. So I was a naysayer. And what he was in 2020, I think it was like 8 touchdowns, 6 picks. He was not a good player. But it's like everyone just focused, he was former walk-on, wasn't good in 2020. This guy sucks. And he turned into a really good college quarterback. And I think you got to make I've been swayed. I think he is Georgia's best quarterback of all time. I think you got to put him number 1. I think it's definitely a contest because he lost one game in
the last 2 years, Matt.
His supporting cast is huge, though. Like that's a big factor of his success. And like if Aaron Murray had that success, but had that team,
Jake Fromm this group or a lot of those Georgia, like I don't think they have that dog in them. They don't have. Stetson has just when he gets hit in the face, and this is something that Eric Ainge. The one part of it that he did tap into that I think what is accurate when it comes to Stetson, he obviously framed it incorrectly, and I didn't like what he tweeted about him. But Stetson's not a punk, but he has the Baker Mayfield mental makeup, right? Yeah. Like we can admit, like he did the phone call thing after he ran in on Tennessee for when they were calling him. Like he has that in him. Like he
did the mic drop versus
right. Like he has LSU. That in him. So let's not pretend he's not like this,
the finger guns and all.
Right.
That.
Like he's not a good old boy where he's like, I'm just humble and happy to be here and I just love the team. It's like, no, Stetson has a little bit he's not cocky, but he's confident. Like he is a very confident gunslinger. Like, hey man, you can't stop me. Like I can run it in. Like those run where he's just untouched and he's just jogging in. For these touchdown runs, you're just like it's humiliating for other teams because he's so at ease, and it should not. Georgia did such a great job, and Todd Monken did such a great job of making it look so easy for him all year long that I think we undervalue what Stetson is as a quarterback. And like one of the things I think about, and it's not his fault, it's like the pressure stuff. Like he had so many clean pocket throws against TCU that TCU obviously sending 3, and which is never a good idea against this Georgia team. But you look at it, the one thing that people discount, he's so good on deep balls. Like he's so good even when he's pressured. So he had 8 attempts of deep, 20-plus yards. He had a 96 passer grade. 3 TDs on 8 attempts deep, Matt Green. He averaged 18 yards per attempt there, 144 yards on balls that traveled 20-plus yards in the air. I mean, he was worse on the short stuff. He was 2 of 5 on the 0 to 9 yard throws. That's where his bad grades were. His bad grades were close to the line of scrimmage. Where he killed people was the intermediate 10 to 19 yards and the deep balls. Like Stetson is he's a gunslinger, but he's also He doesn't make the mistakes that you need, but the thing that opened this Georgia team up significantly was, I'll hit you deep over the right, I'll hit you deep over the middle, and then I'll hit Brock Bowers 10 yards over the middle too, and you're not going to have an answer for it. Like, you're not going to be able to stop it. And I think Stetson deserves a lot of credit for how much of a downfield assassin he was this year and what he became, where it's like, the dude's not a game manager, and he deserves credit for a pretty deep ball and just scaring the bejesus out of these teams, because you give him that opportunity, he's going to kill you on the deep balls. And that was true again against TCU. And TCU, no deep balls. Like, I think they have like one big play total.
Just the one busted coverage.
Yeah, that was it.
I think that play was like 60 yards, and I think TCU ended up with like 168 yards on the whole game, like just 188 yards in this whole game. But yeah, and I think a lot is made of, like we said, of the supporting cast. Like, Brock Bowers is just super elite, and I think you could make a case like last year, like, Stetson was maybe the 15th, 20th best player on the team or so, like, with just, if you're giving a guy a numerical rating on how good he is at his position, with just all of the studs you had on defense and even on the offensive side of the ball too. But like, you actually look at this year, and he's actually one of Georgia's best players. Like, Brock Bowers is still the best player on this defense, or on this offense. But like, Stetson, a lot was put on Stetson. Like, the only team, like we've talked about it a few times on here, the only team that had more attempts than Georgia in the pass attempts in Georgia this year was an air raid offense in Mississippi State. So Georgia was putting a lot on the arm of Stetson Bennett this year. And it was still kind of this narrative. I heard multiple people say, Georgia, Kirby's not going to let Stetson lose the national championship for him. Like, as long as he keeps Stetson from like losing this game, it's like, at some point, are we not just going to acknowledge, like, this guy is winning games for Georgia? Like, he's actually a really good quarterback. And man, just everything Georgia was doing against TCU was working. And it was just, it was fun to watch. Like no one ever said anything about Joe Burrow, like his supporting cast, right? It was just, Joe Burrow's incredible. He's throwing to the two best receivers in the NFL right now, like 2 years out of college. Like, those guys are like literally the two best in the league. And he had a first round pick at running back as well. It's like, no one ever said anything like, yeah, but his supporting cast. And I'm not saying Stetson's
I think
close
that's
to his...
revisionist history. I think they were saying like Jamar Chase and what's the running back's name who went first round?
This man was the number one pick of the draft. It was like Joe Burrow's the greatest college player of all time. Like, that was how he was talked about.
Well, they said he had the best college. LSU's offense had the collective best collection of talent and seasons of all time. I think that's not really fair. I think you're doing a little bit of revisionist history with Joe Burrow and that team. It was a collection. We talked about LSU was 2019, like the super just gargantuan.
But there was never
unit.
A question about Joe Burrow. It's like, yeah, but look how good supporting cast is. Like, are we sure
he's going
like
number one overall?
Are we sure he's this good? Like, his supporting cast is great. There was never a question for a second about if Joe Burrow was legit or not. And it's
right.
Like, Stetson doesn't have close to the supporting cast. And you're talking about, yeah, maybe he deserves to go to the NFL. I don't know. Maybe he should be drafted. Maybe he picked up.
He's
on
getting
free.
drafted. Let's just go ahead and end that. He's going.
I mean, he has to. Like, I don't understand. Like, I seen mock drafts with Will Levis going ahead of C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. And
well, they're going to go ahead.
Anthony Richardson going 6th to the Lions and stuff like that. Like, I have no idea.
Well, he's not going ahead of them. Like, that's not happening. Like, he's not going ahead of any of those guys. But he is going to go. I mean. Now, does he go in front of Hendon Hooker is going to be interesting. That I think they're going to go around the same time. And that's kind of how the season went, where they're older. Because I think Stetson's, 25? Is he?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just uncharted waters. He's entering the Chris Winkie zone a little bit.
But it's not old. I mean, what is Anthony Richardson right now? Probably 21?
20. I think he's 20.
I mean, he's third year in
21.
college, right? I mean, he had the red shirt, and then he's played 2 years. So he's not a young guy, and he's also 21. Hasn't been good. So it's but whatever.
But he's 6'4", 230.
If Will Levis and Anthony Richardson are good NFL players, then I will concede to the NFL that I know nothing about what it takes to play quarterback in the NFL. But right now, I'm kind of baffled. But this isn't about Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. We got plenty of time to talk about those guys.
How did Georgia thrash them when you watch this game, Matt Green? If you had to explain it to somebody who did not watch Georgia TCU on Monday night, how would you explain Georgia demolishing them 65-7?
That's a good question, honestly. I think because the only way to really explain it is like Georgia's just better at every single level of the team. It's like I saw a lot of like pregame stuff of like, oh, who's got the better running back group, who's got the better receivers, who's got the better offensive line, defensive back, just stacking them up. And TCU had several of those edges according to some experts, and I was honestly shocked at how many people were actually picking TCU, with Desmond Howard picking TCU, but whatever. I was kind of surprised. It's like, I think, the defensive back, or TCU's defensive back's good. Is Hodges Tomlinson like an NFL player, like for sure? But it's like, is their secondary on the whole actually better than Georgia? Like, probably not. Like, is the running game something TCU does well? Absolutely. Do their guys have better stats? For sure. Is their running game better than Georgia? Like, I don't really think so. It's like, it's just kind of like Max Duggan even. He was a star player. Is Max Duggan better than Stetson? I don't really know that he is. Like, I don't know that they actually had any edge at any level of the team, and then ultimately just in the trenches, it's just Georgia just built different than TCU is. And I think TCU's built different than Ohio State. I think that was the biggest difference, is when the number one reason Ohio State was able to compete with Georgia the way they did was because they kept CJ Stroud clean-ish. That was the most CJ Stroud's actually ever been sacked in a game in his career, tied with Michigan from last year. Georgia got to him 4 times, but it felt like he had forever. And that was something that Ohio State was able to do that basically no one who's played Georgia has been able to do this season. Like, not in the big games, at least. So it was, I think ultimately it was just Georgia just dominated every facet of the game.
When did you feel like it was over? I know different people had different feelings. I thought it was over when they kicked the field goal, where I was annoyed, where I was like, where Georgia kicked the field goal to go up 10-0. I was like, this under any other circumstance would be like a cowardly move, and something that should be eviscerated. Like, if Heupel ever did something like that, that would drive me up the wall. But they did it, and I was like, this game's over. It's 10-0, and they're just like, we're fine. And obviously TCU had the busted coverage play on the following drive, I believe, if I remember correctly. And you're like, oh, people are like, oh, maybe they dive back in. I'm like, if Georgia was ever nervous about getting in a shootout with TCU, they're not kicking that field goal. I think Georgia kicked that because they were like, oh, they're not going to have an answer for any of this. We're going to be able to score it well. They're averaging, 10 yards a play at that point?
I think you need points when you get a turnover, a short field. So it's like, it was like a 4th and 5, 4th and 6. Like, I think you just go safe.
You were averaging 10 yards a play.
But the drive obviously stalled out, if it ended up with a 4th down. So I definitely didn't think at that point, especially since TCU came down and scored right after that. And then even when they had the busted coverage to McConkey on the big touchdown to put us up 17-7. And honestly, on that play, if the corner goes with McConkey, McIntosh is wide open on the same side. So it's like, you really just cheer. He probably breaks the tackle if he catches it and takes it to the end zone. But after that, it's like it was 17-7. But then the next drive, where Stetson just has the walk-in touchdown, and it's like 2 guys have nobody to block, and Stetson just walks right in. That drive was just so easy that it was like at 24-7, you're like, okay, I think this actually might be over. But the true play that made it over, I think, was Javon Bullard's interception right before halftime. Like, that was just dumb. Like, it's 3rd and 18, and you're throwing like a 14-yard pass into double coverage. It's like, okay, what happens if the guy catches this? It's not a first down. So it's just a dumb risk to take right before the half. And that's another thing. Kirby's been criticized for like his game management for years. And I think people are finally giving up the narrative. Like, yeah, he's a really good coach also, on top of being a recruiter. It's like, he called a timeout on that drive. Like, that was a very aggressive move, like to try to get the ball back. And then TCU throws, Bullard gets the pick, and then Georgia's able to score in like the last 30 seconds to go up 38-7 before halftime, and that's when you're like, it's 38-7. I was trying to jinx it in the house. I was like, guys, it's 38-7. We're not the Atlanta Falcons. Tom Brady's not on the other sideline. This shit is over. Like, I don't care. It's over. They can't score on us. So, yeah, I would say probably the 24/7 is probably when you felt like, yeah, this is going to be easy.
Yeah, that's fair. I will say, like, I forget who I was listening to who talked about like the analyst role, and I wonder if that's part of it, because like we're giving Kirby credit for the timeout call that saved the game against Ohio State and what you're talking about there. You got the headset, and there's so many people in your ear. We don't know who it is, but like I think that's like part of the appeal of having these 200K analysts who at some of these universities where their entire job is to help in game management, and like, hey, time out here, or hey, do this here, here's the odds here. So I wonder if coaches would ever be honest about how much of these big time, like the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Clemsons, the Tennessees now, I mean, up and down the list of like how much of it is it just the coach making these calls, like these gut calls, and how much of it is just the unbelievable support staff in the building who are around helping as well? How collective of an effort is this? Because that would help in terms of identifying how on their own these head coaches are in today's game with making these kind of big game calls.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like, I think that's the number one thing Kirby took from Nick Saban. Like, I think the reason that Nick Saban is the GOAT, I think, is his actual CEO ability of, putting the right people in the right jobs, just having no stone left unturned, just having, contingency plans for your contingency plans. I think, Sam Pittman, I think, credited Kirby that he's like worried about who like the eighth string like snapper is or something like that. He's just like, he's always worried about every single aspect of the organization. I think that's what's made Nick Saban as elite of elite. Because I mean, these guys at the end of the day, once you get to Division I like football circles, you're not coaching stuff that other people don't know. There's no secrets. They're having damn coaching clinics like, oh, this is what I do when I see this situation, and talking about it with other coaches. Like, they all strategize. They all know so much. They've forgotten more about football than any of us will ever know. Like, these guys are so elite just mentally and thinking the game of football when you get to that level. So I think it's the actual, like, the ability to be a recruiter obviously is huge for Kirby Smart, and just the administrative aspect of it, of just like having just a perfectly run organization. Like you look at Georgia, like, I mean, Todd Monken has credited Mike Bobo for game planning multiple games this year. Like, I think Monken is honestly the one that this game was a showcase of Todd Monken, because there's been kind of like a theory, message board talk amongst Georgia fans that it's like, how much are we holding back on a week-to-week basis? It feels like so much. You see Georgia get these big leads, run it out in the third and fourth quarter, that it feels like we're leaving so much on the table, and you're constantly having to defend Georgia's offense when you talk to other fan bases, like, oh yeah, but we could do way more if the quarterback threw for 4 quarters, if this, if that. And it's like, this is the last game of the season. Can't hold back now, right? The great Dan Fouts quote. You looked at this game and it was like, this was Todd Monken just emptying the clip. It was like, this is everything. Like, we're going to throw everything at TCU. They're not really prepared for this. Georgia just had so many different ways to beat teams. And I feel like that's what I talked about on the preview of this matchup. It's just like, Brock Bowers is the star on this offense, and you saw him have like a star level performance, like 150 yards and a touchdown. But like, Kenny McIntosh has been such a star for this offense. Like, he had 50 yards rushing, only 1 catch in this game for negative yards. Like, he's like the 3rd or 4th leading receiver on this team. Like, Arian Smith, after 100 yards in the Ohio State game, had 1 catch for 3 yards. Even A.D. Mitchell only had 1 catch in this game, but it was for a touchdown. Like, there's just so many guys on this offense. Even McConkey, I think, only had a couple. He had 1 run. He had 5 for 88 and 2 touchdowns. So like, there's just so many different ways for this team to beat the opponent. It was just, I feel like you got to see the full display of like, yeah, this is. I mean, we couldn't have hung 65 every game or anything, but like, this Georgia offense, it felt like all season we weren't seeing 4 quarters of just what they could do, and you saw it in this one. Like it was a bloodbath. Like they were just, TCU didn't know what hit them, and this was elite offensive play.
How about the really brutal David Pollock, Nick Saban exchange? Did you see that?
I did see that. That's incredible.
I will say, and I've said this, I think going in, the people who are just dunking on the grave of Nick Saban in this album, they were maybe like they were right there a year ago. Let's not forget that. They absolutely dismantled a good Kansas State team who beat TCU, obviously, in the Big 12 title game. Just absolutely obliterated them out of the building. In similar fashion to what Georgia just did to TCU. They obviously did not win a title in the last 2 years with Bryce Young. It's kind of wild that he will walk out of Bama with a ring as the guy under center, considering he's the best Alabama quarterback of all time. You look at this class coming in that they have, it's arguably their best class ever. I think Bama's going to be fine. I think Georgia is now for certain, but it goes back to what I'm saying, where it's a game of inches. It's a game of moments for these big dogs like Bama and Georgia. And I don't think it's that clear. I think Georgia is 1A, but I'm like, Bama still won in 2020. Bama was still right there in 2021. I understand they underachieved under Bama standards because, like you said, before the year, and I was one of those people who predicted Bama to win it all this year, and it was going to be a revenge tour for Saban based on that loss in the national title game to Georgia. But like, let's pump the brakes on Nick Saban loosening his grip on the college football world. I think that's a little premature. I think it's more 1A and 1B. I think now we're at a point where Georgia and Alabama are coexisting in this we run the sport vortex. So I think that's more of what it is. I don't think Georgia has like knocked Bama out. I think it's just Georgia has joined Alabama. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense, but because by definition, I think that kind of means the Bama dynasty is over. It's like that doesn't mean that Bama can no longer win a championship. But
if they win next year, that'd be 2 and 4 years, right? Like that's a dynasty. 2 and 4 years.
But is it? I mean, the dynasty.
And they went in the third. They
debatable,
went another one. Like I think that's still a dynasty.
But I'm saying I think the dynasty is over because they had this stranglehold on being the elite team of college football. Like there was no close second. Like people tried to act like Clemson was a close second for a few years, and it's like they were second. They were a clear second, but they weren't ever actually close to Alabama. They had a couple years of just, elite, a couple teams that were as good as Alabama, but that's not to be confused with the program, with the machine that Alabama is. It's like where their rebuilding years are when they have, Jalen Hurts as the starter and they go to the national championship game. Or last year is a rebuilding year where they lose to Georgia in the national championship game. So it feels like now they're like a regular elite team in college football. Like they could win the national championship. Their chances to win the national championship are as good or better than just about anyone out there. But in terms of like the true, like them just being the juggernaut of just like the standard of college football, I feel like you have to say that era is over.
We'll see. Let me see how next year goes. Let me see. Without Stetson Bennett.
You think they're going to be better next year? Without Bryce Young, without Will Anderson, without Jahmyr Gibbs? Like, Jahmyr Gibbs at times was the only thing their offense had. Like they're gonna hit the portal, I'm sure, but they brought in the best class of all time. Is that right? The highest ranked class ever in this. So it's obviously big time, but Georgia brought in the number 2 class. It's like Georgia brought in a super elite class as well, and there's a lot more proven commodities on Georgia's roster. Like they're not. Like Georgia, the 2023 was, after last year, 2023 was kind of always perceived to be maybe a better team than 2022, just because this team was so young.
Justice Haynes is coming in, who they beat Georgia for. Like that was a huge surprise.
No, for sure.
So he might be a big factor. We see these rookies. You saw Brock Bowers make an immediate impact, and we've seen that at some of these schools where, as freshmen, Jace McClellan obviously going to be the guy there, but I think they're going to be fine there. We'll see what happens at receiver. I think that's one of the bigger questions with Kobe Prentice and Jermaine Burton. I assume is going to be back, but I think Ja'Cory Brooks. Malik Benson was that big JUCO transfer that Bama beat Tennessee out for. I think he has a chance to be really, really good for them.
But also, if you look at a guy like Brock Bowers in 2021, he's like, that was one of the cherries on top. Like Georgia's core was like their juniors and seniors on defense that like had been around a while, like the Jordan Davises and Devontae Wyatt's coming back for their senior year. Like, I mean, obviously the quarterback room turned out to be way better than it was expected to be. But I don't know. I think Alabama, I mean, you saw what they were this year. Like, they were not a juggernaut this year. It's hard for me to think Alabama's going to be better in 2023 than they were in 2022 without
but it wouldn't
the best
surprise
quarterback.
You, would it?
I mean, nothing really surprises you with Alabama. But
like if Ty Simpson's awesome immediately, would that really jump? Like
if Ty Simpson's better than Bryce Young, that would absolutely shock me. And I think with what this roster is, like it's not necessarily getting like a lot better. Like in term, like obviously, like true, you can only put so much on true freshmen. Like they're gonna have good players on this team, but Alabama's losing a lot of their core and especially the best quarterback they've ever had in the history of the program. Like I think that's a lot, and that's why Georgia is scary because Stetson Bennett, while we are going to call him now the best quarterback in the history of Georgia's program, it's like if they land a 5-star number 1 quarterback in the country, like there's a good chance that guy could be better than Stetson Bennett, and Georgia's offense could be better under an actual NFL highly touted prospect. You know, it's like I don't think people have like even made that realization yet that Georgia was doing this with, and obviously Stetson is way better than just a former walk-on. Like that doesn't do him justice, but this is a guy that we're debating if he can play in the league or not. If Georgia actually gets a guy who's a first-round pick running the show on offense, like this offense could be even more dangerous.
For sure. Let's see. Can I get a couple of years of Bama not being national champions? Can I just get a couple, let's get to 3 or 4 and then we'll start talking. Let's see what happens. I'm not saying I'm rooting for it. Absolutely not. I don't want Georgia and Alabama to just be alternating for the next couple of years. That wouldn't be fun. But we'll see. Who stood out watching from home when you were watching from home? Who stood out to you when you're in the Green household? Who you were like, oh my God, he's awesome tonight? Who from the Dawgs were you just really all in on in the moment?
I think you got to shout out the guy who made the key play in the Ohio State game, and that would be Javon Bullard. I think Javon Bullard was just an absolute playmaker. Like Georgia had 3 turnovers in this game. Javon Bullard had 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery. Like he's just one of those guys. And once again, this guy was a 3-star. Like one of the lowest ranked guys in Kirby Smart's class, was the most outstanding defensive player of the Peach Bowl and the most outstanding defensive player of the national championship game. Like this guy playing that nickel spot, he just has, what do they say, has bad intentions when he gets to the ball. Like he just hits people hard. He's so fast, so quick. Like he's just an explosive player. And I think like I said, I feel like the whole 3-3-5 thing gets overblown because teams have 5 defensive backs. Most teams have 5 defensive backs on the field most of the time. And like it's interesting, like kind of the era we live in of football, that nickel corner is like, that's a guy who's going to go in the first round potentially for being a star nickel corner. Like you're a 5th defensive back, but that's just become such a crucial role in the game of football. Like Javon Bullard, and on that fumble recovery too, I just happened to be watching him the whole play, and he's the guy that makes the receiver kind of, he gets around the block and forces him to the outside, and like that's what allows Chris Smith to a second to get on the play, and then Javon Bullard's just right in the middle of everything and is able to recover the fumble. But like that guy, he was just making so many plays. He makes plays in the pass rush, behind the line of scrimmage, and also in coverage. And I don't think I've seen him actually drop deep on that like he did on that interception he had. Like he's usually a guy that's playing right around the line of scrimmage. But you know, it was I honestly don't know if Max Duggan saw him on that play, because it looks like Quentin Johnston is just running wide open, and then all of a sudden your nickel corner is in center field, and he picked it off. So Javon Bullard, I feel like, was just everywhere in this game, and this Georgia defense was just absurd. Jalen Carter, I'm definitely gonna miss having a defensive tackle that's just absolutely unblockable.
What will stay with you the most from this 2-year Georgia run, Matt Green?
Oh man, this the 2-year run. I think just this level of defense, I think is just absurd. In the when all of the narratives, all of Nick Saban saying great defense doesn't beat great offense anymore. Like you gotta have elite offense, and obviously Georgia did have a much better offense, but I think people thought you couldn't play elite defense anymore. Like it was just about outscoring the opponent, and seeing Georgia give up 10 points a game last year, like 14 a game this year, like that's something that, I mean, we might not see the end of that with what Georgia brought in, like 6 or 7 top 50 recruits that are all defensive players in this upcoming class. So their defense might not be slowing down anytime soon, but also just Stetson Bennett. Like this is just like the greatest story in the history of like college football, maybe of who he is, and just like how determined this guy, not only was he to play college football, but specifically to play quarterback at the University of Georgia. Like Georgia's constantly telling him, you're not good enough to play here. Because that's the one thing that's, I think, the best part of Stetson Bennett's story to me is it's one thing to start as a walk-on, and then a Rodrigo Blankenship. You start as a walk-on, get an opportunity, and then you earn a scholarship, and then you're an All-American. Like that's a great story. But it's another thing to start as a walk-on, and you're like, you know what? I'm never going to play here if I just sit around and just try to work up the depth chart. They're always going to out-recruit me. I need to go somewhere and get the reps on my own, show that I'm good enough to play at somewhere like Georgia, and to just transfer to a community college and actually get a scholarship to Georgia. And then, he had the opportunity to start, and then he wasn't good enough. And JT Daniels becomes the guy, and it's like, that's it. It was an incredible story. This guy, this former walk-on had, I mean, if that was all he ever had in his life, it's probably like, I got to start 7 or 8 games as the quarterback for University of Georgia. Like, that's the greatest experience of my life. And then this guy fucking comes back the next year, and all of a sudden, he's the quarterback on a national championship team, and then he runs it back and does it twice. Like, Three quarterbacks have ever won 2 national championships. The graphic put 4 on the screen, but you know how I feel about USC claiming their back-to-back garbage. It never happened. They won 1 BCS title. But Tommy Frazier in 94, 95, A.J. McCarron in 11 and 12, and now Stetson Bennett. And none of those guys are good NFL quarterbacks. That doesn't mean anything. But in the college level, like Stetson Bennett's legacy, it's just insane, man.
Yeah, it is. And the Timothy Chalamet biopic on Stetson Bennett's career, where he'll be playing Stetson Bennett, should be one for the ages in a couple of years.
The Underdog. That's the name of the movie right there. That's the Stetson Bennett story. Also, I think maybe my favorite moment of this, that kind of like almost. It's honestly going to be like it could be the rallying cry of Kirby Smart's entire career. It could be his entire legacy, is after the Clemson win in 2021 to say you're either elite or you're not. It's like that's a freezing cold takes, an old takes exposed, just waiting to happen right there. Like you're either elite or you're not. Lose 6 weeks later, oh, I guess you're not. Like that's just waiting to be thrown right back in your face. You say it after the first game of the season. You didn't say it after you won the national championship. After the first game of the season, you're either elite or you're not. You go win the national championship. You go win it a second straight time. Like that's about as elite as it gets. But also just to predict it before it ever really happened, like that's a gangster move right there.
For sure. Last thing on this game. Or I guess really on this Georgia run to this point, Matt Green. What happens next year with the schedule? I do think it's funny that people are pointing out, like Georgia fans are really upset. They're like, we had Oklahoma on the schedule and it got removed. And it's like, well, that's not really the game that would have made it more palpable for fans, right? Like I think people are overlooking that's not the issue. It's not the one out of conference game that Georgia's just going to blow out Oklahoma. We saw this Oklahoma team. Like that's not a game. Like we're not missing anything by replacing them with whoever it was, Austin Peay or whatever. Both going to be blowouts. I will say the issue, and this is something that gets cleaned up once Oklahoma and Texas come here, is that you just get more variety, and you'll get more variety in the SEC. Just Georgia getting challenged a little bit more, because part of the issue right now is the East is not great outside of Tennessee and Georgia. Florida's down, Kentucky's down a little bit. South Carolina's going to miss a bowl next year. You have Mizzou who's down. Obviously Vanderbilt's down, and then you obviously miss Alabama and LSU in the SEC too for the next year. Like, that's more of the issue, is that you really miss all the potential good regular season contests outside of ending the year back-to-back on the road at Tennessee and at Georgia Tech. I'll go ahead and pencil that one in. Just, folks, get ready for that one in Knoxville later on next year. But is it a three-peat? Like, we've never seen this. We're now in the territory where it's like, should they be expected to go 3 straight? Like, is this now a 3 straight situation?
I think it's definitely on the table. Especially, we've talked about, the uncertainty of the quarterback position for like everyone in the top 10. It's like almost everyone is replacing their starter, or they like just replaced him at the end of the year and it's going to be his first full year starting type of thing. So from that perspective, there's no real clear favorite. And with what Georgia returns, like, they return most of the roster. And I think Carson Beck is a guy that a lot of people expect to step in and be ready to, have that more prototype NFL like arm or something, like he's supposed to have a cannon, and he looks pretty athletic too. I think Georgia fans might, take exception to the schedule, like, jabs, just because the Oklahoma part was the only part you're in control of. It's like the out-of-conference, it's like, yeah, the out-of-conference is terrible, but we did have Oklahoma on there before the SEC, made Georgia take them off because they're not going to get both ends of the home and home. It's like there's nothing Georgia can really do about Florida being down, about Auburn being down, about South Carolina having like this breakthrough, program trajectory changing season, and then just all of the key players leaving and having nothing really left over. Like, I would be honestly surprised if South Carolina makes a bowl game at this point. And then just you get Ole Miss and Auburn from the West. It's like, that's probably not the most difficult 2 Western Division teams that an Eastern team is going to face in 2023. And then it's like you look at November 18th, second last game of the year versus in Knoxville. It's like that's really the one game that scares you, other than just going at Auburn and just traditionally just what Jordan-Hare Stadium is, and that being whichever quarterback wins the job, most likely Carson Beck. That is their first road start of their career, like 4 or 5 games in. But we've seen what Auburn is the last couple of years. It's like we've seen what LSU, like Brian Kelly year 1. Like, obviously Sonny Dykes just did a lot year 1. There's teams that can, even Josh Heupel year 1. Tennessee wasn't a great team, but they were a much more dangerous team than they'd previously been. So we've seen like teams take a big step and a big turnaround in year 1. So, Hugh Freeze could have Auburn be a much dangerous team next year, but you're like trying to find the games that like could maybe somehow potentially trip Georgia up, because this, like, Florida, I just don't, I have no idea what direction Florida is really going in. It's hard to know what to make of their 2022 season. So yeah, you look at Auburn and at Tennessee, and then maybe just Ole Miss, because that's a matchup you don't see very often. But it's hard to see. It's hard to see 2 losses on this. It's hard to see one. There's like no way you can see a second loss. So while Georgia might not be the favorite to win it all, I mean, whatever. If there's any bets to actually make the college football playoff, I'd almost lock them in like 100%.
Yeah. We'll see. There's a lot of musical chairs, except for the Pac-12 for whatever reason. Like, Cam Rising announced this week he's back. So you get Cam Rising back. You get Michael Penix Jr. back at UW. You get Bo Nix back at Oregon, which is a surprise. And then you get Caleb Williams back at USC. So we'll see if they cannibalize each other again. But the Pac-12 should benefit from that continuity at the top, because the SEC is just all new faces. Joe Milton, Carson Beck, probably Ty Simpson. I guess Jackson Dart is back. So that's something there for Ole Miss. Jaden Daniels is back, so that's good for LSU. But new quarterback in there for Kentucky with Devin Leary, new quarterback for Florida with Graham Mertz. You just go up and down this conference. There's just so much turnover all over the place that I don't know. But it's amazing that we're here, that a three-peat is probably the favorite scenario here for the Dawgs going into 2023.
Also, I have some advice for some college football programs out there. If you should win your first national championship in a year that ends in 1, so that then you can say go for 2 and 22, and then I'd go for 3 and 23. It's great for marketing, for branding purposes. It's good stuff. I got to give Brandon Adams, Dog Nation, a shout out. There weren't many people talking about Georgia repeating this year, even though obviously every defending champion always has the opportunity to repeat. Like, I feel like the Braves were almost talked about more of a repeat champion than Georgia was. I wasn't really expecting a back-to-back national title, but they had the go for 2 and 22 hashtag going very early, so I gotta give them the shout out. Also, one grinds my gears I got here. I just hate that the college football playoff ruined their logo on this chest with putting it in the January that it's being played, because it just adds so much confusion. It's like, is this the 22 national champion? The jersey says 2023, but that's how they did it from the start. So they just kind of have to keep it going. But yeah, I always hate seeing that, because it's like, we're the 2022 champions, but all the pictures say 2023. Like, I don't know. That's always been like a weird thing to me. Like the bowl games, just call it the previous year, so we don't get confused.
I would agree with that. I think that's the way to go. Matt Green, before we wrap up here on our national championship recap show here on the Full Ride on the Chase Thomas podcast, youtube.com/Chase Thomas podcast. Like and subscribe, all that good stuff. If you would prefer to watch this very program. Our final top 10, which is a little bit different. We each did our final top 10 as this season concluded here. It's amazing that we're here, that the season is over, but it is finally over, and the off season continues on. It seems like for you, Matt Green, we don't have to dive into this. This is more of an off season thing, but I think the calendar might be changing. You see the coaches talking about how ridiculous the December stuff is.
Yes.
And that they're going on record and pushing back that I think it seems like we're heading towards National Signing Day going back to February, where it's like we're getting rid of the December signing day extravaganza, because part of the issue is just enrollment for January, where you have to get kids in for the start of classes at the early part of January. And I don't know. We'll see, but it seems like we're headed towards that way, and that'll be something to monitor this off season, which would be good, making it easier and making the December calendar less insane. Matt Green,
without a doubt, we got to make that happen
for sure. Our top 10. Would you prefer to go first on your final top 10 rankings for the college football season?
Yeah, you want to just both name our top 10 and then we talk about it? Or you want to you name mine, we talk about it, you name yours, and we talk about it. How do you want to do it?
Let's do that. You run through your 10, and then I'll run through my 10, and we can decipher why we did what we did.
All right, so I'm going to start at 1. I got the Georgia Bulldogs, number 1. Ohio State Buckeyes coming at number 2 for me. TCU at 3. Michigan 4. Tennessee 5. Alabama 6. Washington 7. 8. Number 8 is Penn State. Utah at 9. And then I went Kansas State at 10. I'll be honest, I was struggling with my 9 and 10. I thought about Tulane in there, but I'm like, do I really think Tulane's better than Kansas State? Like, the Big 12 championship, like, Kansas State was just a good team. Tulane, they were good, but I don't know. I'll give them a little honorable mention. But yeah, that's my top 10 right there. What are your first thoughts?
Kansas State I did not have in my top 10. I think Washington, I was surprised you're that high on them. I think they're really good. Obviously, double-digit win season for them, year one. Another one under the radar with Kalen DeBoer. I thought about putting them in for USC because I have USC at 8 in mine. But I just came down to like what I saw, the best version of these teams is kind of where I landed in my final top 10. So after we saw all the games.
See, that's a different story though. Best version of somebody is different than like what they consistently put on the field this season.
That's my top 10, my end of season top 10. This is like
enough.
MVP voting. We all have our own ideas of like what matters to us. And for me, I did 1 Georgia, 2 Bama, 3 Ohio State, 4 Tennessee, 5 TCU, 6 Michigan, 7 Utah, 8 USC, 9 Penn State, 10 Oregon.
Now, see, how does Alabama get to number 2? I have Alabama at 6.
Alabama, I think, would be favored in a neutral site against Ohio State at this point, based on what we saw against Kansas State and then Ohio State losing to Michigan and then getting there. I think they would be favored on a neutral site. That matters to me. I think Alabama would be favored against everybody outside of Georgia to this point. I think Bama losing 2 games by a combined 4 points, one being on the road in Tennessee and the other being the rivalry game against LSU, also on the road late, on a crazy 2-point try by Jason Taylor's nephew? I don't remember which one he is. But either way, 2 close calls, and outside of that, they took care of business each and every week. And I think they finished top 5 in defense and top 10 in offense. They were electric everywhere. Bryce Young, I think, is still the best quarterback in the country. You go up and down the list. I don't know. I think the Kansas State blowout and them all playing and just being like, let's just be clear. Like, we would blast TCU. We would blast Michigan. And if you put us in the national title game, we would give Georgia the best game. And that's the one downside of this year, is that we never saw Georgia versus Alabama this year. The fact that we never got to see these 2 teams play this year, especially based on what we saw last year. Do you know why we never got to see
these 2 teams play?
Say it again?
Because do you know why we didn't get to see these 2 teams play?
I'm not disagreeing with why.
Because Alabama didn't take care of business.
I'm not disagreeing with that, Matt Green. All I'm saying is, like, it would have been nice to see, because then we would have known, like, how much of a drop-off there was from 2021 to 2022 with this Alabama team. I would have liked to have seen it, like in the SEC title game.
I would have loved to have seen it, but I don't see how you can look at what these teams did in 2022 and justify Alabama being better than Tennessee. Like, what did Alabama do that was better than Tennessee in 2022? Like, they didn't get
their brains beat in by South Carolina.
I mean, that's true. They barely beat Texas. They barely beat A&M. They barely beat even Ole Miss. Like, they lost to LSU. They lost to Tennessee. Like, what they do in a Sugar Bowl game, like, that's not going to change my opinion. Like, I know how talented Alabama is, but, like, this kind of just benefit of the doubt Alabama gets, like, I don't really understand. Like, they were never dominant at any point this season. And, like, you saw Tennessee have dominant performances against an LSU team, like against, I mean, at least they won this crazy shootout with Alabama. Obviously, that was a great game. But, like, I look at Ohio State. Like, Ohio State is the only team that I can really justify being ahead of TCU. Like, TCU earned, like, I feel like they just got blasted, so people act like they're just a fraud now. Like, they had to beat Michigan. Like, they had to beat Michigan to get to that game. Ohio State's the only team that can sit here like, we played Georgia really close, and we can, like, have a legitimate claim that we're better than TCU. Anyone else, it's like, yeah, Alabama could be favored on a neutral field versus TCU, but, like, this team started 12-0, went 12-1, obviously, after losing to, a top 10 team in their conference championship game. But I just, this benefit of the doubt that Alabama just automatically gets, I mean, I understand why people just want to say it, but, like, how often do you just, or after how long do you have to just look at what they do on the field? And they weren't dominant at all this year.
They're one of 3 teams in college football this year to be top 10 in offense and defense. It was them, Michigan, and Georgia.
And they were a really good team, but it's like when you're talking number 2, like, I mean, we don't know how Georgia would have played again, or how Alabama would have played against Georgia. So, like, we never got that matchup. But I think with what Ohio State did, like, Alabama's schedule wasn't, like, particularly, like, difficult compared to Ohio State's. Like, we criticized kind of some of these Big Ten schedules, but, like, there's a lot of bad teams in the SEC this year. Like, they played Tennessee. Like, that's probably, other than Michigan, that's probably better than anybody Ohio State played. But I don't know. Like, Alabama didn't have the resume to back it up, and just all their close wins. Like, I don't know. I didn't see it from this year. And I'm definitely, for what Tennessee did on the field, I'm putting Tennessee ahead of Alabama.
I thought about moving Oregon up significantly, like to 6 or 7. Like, Oregon, the best version, and like what we saw with Bo Nix in that group after week 1 and the thrashing to Georgia. I thought they really found their rhythm, and they were an efficient monster up until that Washington loss where Bo Nix gets shaken up in some crazy in-game calls by Dan Lanning that kind of flipped that one too. But I I don't know. I think that's one I think about. But then Utah, it's like you lost to Florida. This was a horrible Florida team, so I don't even feel great about putting them as high as I did. But they also blasted USC twice, and hey, they deserve credit for just the kind of program that they built, and they've been one of the better teams in the country. I think Penn State, you could tell me on being higher. Their only 2 losses were to the 2 teams they should have lost to in Michigan and Ohio State, and they took care of business in every other game and were great. And they were, I think, top 10 in defense. And where did they end up? Yeah, 20th in offense. I mean, they were borderline top 8, top 7 team this year. Obviously, win the bowl game, the last big Rose Bowl, non-playoff Rose Bowl, the Big Ten, Pac-12 Rose Bowl. They'll be the last big winners of that one. So, I don't know. I think Penn State has a lot to be excited about if you're a Penn State fan going into next year with Drew Aller and company, because I think they made big strides getting to 10 wins too, or 11 total.
I don't get your USC at 8 either. After getting blasted by Utah and then losing to Tulane, like I
don't think they cared about the Tulane game, and I hate to be that guy. I just, after how their season ended against Utah, I'm just like I don't know, man. They finished number 3 in scoring, 41 points a game. Right there behind Tennessee and Ohio State. Obviously had the Heisman winner. Caleb Williams, he belongs somewhere in that top 10. Like, him alone is enough for them to be a top 10 team.
I think this exercise honestly don't get me wrong, a 12-team playoff, it's going to be fun. You know, I'm going to watch college football, and it's going to be more meaningful games. Like, And at the end of the season, it's going to be more meaningful games. What that does to the regular season meaningful games is still to be determined. But what this exercise showed me was, like, I'm not really looking forward to 12 teams. Like, you had Penn State at 9. I had Penn State at 8. Like, Penn State, that may as well have been, like, every team Mark Richt had. Like they lost to the 2 best teams they played. Didn't really beat any good teams until the Rose Bowl. Like, they did get the win in the Rose Bowl. So, like, that's good, and that's probably what justified them being top 8 or 9 to me. I probably wouldn't have had them in the top 10 because that's, like, the only really good team they played. But, like, I'm struggling to get to 10, like, teams that I thought were good. Like, we're going to have Kansas State. I mean, did they end up with 4 losses? You had Oregon in there. I think they ended up with either 3 or 4 losses. Like,
I think 3 because they beat
USC and Utah both had 4 losses, right, this year?
No, Utah had 3, right?
Utah ended up 10-4.
Oh, I guess they lost the Rose Bowl.
USC's 11-3. So, yeah, it's like Kansas State ended up 10-4. Like, it's a struggle to find, like, 10, like, really good teams. And it's like I feel like this sport just lasts as long as it has, with people fucking voting on who they thought the best team was at the end of the game, when 1 plays 8 and 2 plays 5, like, oh, no, 1 is better. Actually, 2 is better. It's like just this totally just arbitrary system. Like, we fixed that and said, you know what, we'll have the 2 best teams play. You know what, we'll get a little bit of leeway. We'll go to 4. It's like we still maintain the integrity of, like, you have to be almost perfect to win the championship in this sport. And the 4-team, it's like if you were just about perfect, like if you're undefeated, you're not going to miss out on a 4-team playoff. And I feel like that was the ultimate thing, like that screwed teams like, an Auburn in 2004, or even maybe, whatever your opinion is on if you're a Boise State fan or a UCF fan or someone like, or even TCU, whatever year that was. Like, if you're undefeated, you're going to make a 4-team playoff. I think it's debatable year in and year out if you're in a group of 5, but going to 12 teams, like, we're going to start to see 3 and 4 loss teams, like, make it. And, some of these teams have 3 and 4 losses because they lost their bowl game. So I guess that is a little skewed from that perspective. But I wonder, like, how many teams are really deserving to play for a national championship at the end of the season? It's like the 4 teams just seems like the perfect kind of, and we're now seeing different teams make it too, multiple years in a row. It's like, I don't know. I think this showed that it's a struggle to find 10 good teams in college football, and now you're gonna have 12 that have a chance to win it. I don't know. It should be interesting to see if nothing else.
Well, I think, and we can end it here. Richard Johnson, I cited him earlier, but he's a great Sports Illustrated writer, and it's a great podcast. But something else that he said that kind of speaks to what you're saying, because he's in the know, and he talked about, like, the people in the committee and stuff, like the expansion is not about getting more champions. Like the result's still going to be the same. Like the blue chippers and the Georgias, the Bamas of the world are still going to win these 12-team playoffs more often than not. It's more about participation of those 4 and 3 loss teams where they can hang the banner of like, we made the playoff in 2018. What a cool moment for our sport or for our university that we at least qualified. You know what I mean? Like that's what it's about. It's not actually about getting more access for those teams to make a national title run. It's just for them to be like, hey, we played an important game in late December or January, and that's never been a thing for us before. Like Minnesota will be in a playoff at some point, and it's like they would have never been there in the 14 playoff. So it's more about just inclusion.
If the accomplishment is less, does it?
The casual fan doesn't care about that.
Does it still hit the same? Like
the casual fan does not care.
Like TCU, this is a ridiculous accomplishment. Cincinnati is a crazy accomplishment. But once you get into Cincinnati, I guess, isn't like the craziest accomplishment because they didn't have to necessarily beat any juggernauts to get to the Final Four. But so from that perspective, it is going to be more decided on the field. I mean, it's a good point. It's going to be more, those games between number 15 and number 10 are going to mean a lot more down the stretch of the season. But, we'll see what it does to some of those Georgia, Tennessee, number 1 versus number 3 regular season matchups, how significant those games will really be moving forward.
I'm just not a sky is falling person. Like college football is still like about the regular season and the fall Saturdays. Like I'm not going to think about that stuff when I'm packing Neil in. I think people are overblowing like how much anticipation or what the scenario or what the environment's going to be like. I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's still going to be a big deal when that game happens with a 14 playoff or a 12-team playoff, even if the stakes are different, because you're not really thinking about that going in. Like I promise you're not. You just want to beat your rival. Like that's just not coming into play there, I would say.
I think the losses just aren't as devastating though. It's like what is the kick 6 that was before the 14 playoff. Mm-hmm. So I guess you could make the argument the kick 6 is not. Well,
it matters for seeding now, right? Like
playoff. That's
the difference. Is it will affect seeding, or if you do that, it's like, oh crap, we don't get a bye or something now. The kick 6, and now you have to go play a good Penn State team or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's fair. It'll like I said, it's only doomsday, because we haven't seen this, and we have, I don't like the NFL as much as college football, so the more it looks like the NFL, I worry that I won't enjoy the sport as much. Like you have teams that lose 6 and 7 games that can win the Super Bowl, and that's just not the case in college football. And it won't be, to that extent 6 or 7 games, but you could definitely see some 3 or 4 loss teams that can, make a run, and you can argue if that's a good thing or a bad thing for the sport. But ultimately,
I don't think you have to worry about it becoming the NFL anytime soon. We just had a 65-7 national title game, Matt Green. That's not happening in the Super Bowl. I'm just going to go ahead and say we're not even anywhere close.
No, that's fair. But yeah, I think for the people that don't like the same teams being it over and over again, like I don't think 12 is necessarily going to fix anything. But
it's not about fixing. It's just
we're
about
going to see more different matchups that we never.
That's the main thing. Is they want different matchups for TV, and that's the biggest thing. It's we're going to get matchups that we never used to get, and they're under a playoff banner, and it's just they're going to do bonkers ratings. I think they'll do better ratings in the final. Like I think you have to do a home playoff game for Alabama versus like Washington or something. Or USC, like that's something we've never seen before in the sport. And I think that's going to be a big, big number and a big reason for those folks to travel and go see it. So
yeah, Washington, they're one of the few teams, we didn't really say anything about them. They're one of the few teams that got kind of hosed this year. Like that Pac-12 format, just changing it before the year ever started, like getting rid of the divisional, like, but not changing the scheduling. Like they got just straight hosed. Like with the Pac-12 having so many good teams that like were playing each other, they didn't really prove. It was never really proven that they weren't one of the 2 best teams in the Pac-12 this year. Like they could have won the Pac-12 North and actually been in there, but I don't know. I felt like Washington could feel a little hosed about how their 2022 season went. But not that they would have won the championship or anything. But
there you go, Matt Green. Always a pleasure, my sir.
I got one more thing. I'll leave you with this, sir. One of the one of the greatest lines in television history is Andy Bernard in the final episode of The Office. I don't know, if you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
I wish someone would tell me I totally butchered it. I wish someone would tell me when we were in the good old days, so you can enjoy it more. Georgia fans, we are officially in the good old days. So celebrate every single second of this. Throw out the 1998s. Throw out the 2008s to Tennessee and Florida fans. Like we heard the 1980s stuff forever. Like this is a whole new era, man. It's Georgia. It's Kirby Smart's world in college football.
Thank God that we have other sports to pivot to, Matt Green. It's basketball season. It's baseball season. Congratulations on a job well done, but it's everything school time here on the Chase Thomas podcast going forward. 11-4 Georgia Bulldogs, like in basketball, looking great. And then
man, we got a basketball team this year. They're not terrible.
That's always a start. Matt Green, congratulations, sir.
That's where they had to start from.
On back-to-back national championships. Big accomplishment. We'll see if they can do a three-peat. We have all the time in the world to sort through the possibilities there. Next year, our last 14 playoff. So next season is it for us on that front, and then we're moving on to the 12-team playoff. But this is officially it for the 2-a-week portions here on the program, back to 1 a week during the offseason. We'll have all kinds of fun stuff to talk about all offseason long because college football is a year-round sport now. So all kinds of stuff that we'll parse through. But thank you for another fun season. There must be something about this podcast and you appearing on it. So 2 years of Matt Green on the podcast, 2 national titles. So
there you go, man.
Appreciate you making the time as always, and job well done. And I will talk to you very soon.
Yes, sir.